Hey, everybody, welcome to the Nostalgically Hip podcast. I'm Andy,
I'm Ryan.
and this is our inaugural very first episode of the Nostalgically Hip podcast. So, without further ado, I would just jump right into it, man.
Yeah.
The topic of today, I'm sure you've heard of Navy SEALs.
hmm
I'm sure you've heard of Special Forces and, Green Berets, Delta Force, Air Force PJs, all that.
hmm
Um, those guys are pretty special. You know what they do. Their jobs are they're high speed and they get the job done. Right.
Right.
Those are the operators that our nation calls on when they need a surgical strike. Um, but the cool thing about those guys is they all came from one particular unit, and that was back in World War II. That was the Marine Raider Battalion. So they were formed in 1942, and what was special about these guys is unconventional warfare. Essentially, they took the guerrilla tactics. Basically, is what they did, and is really impressive. Unfortunately, and we'll get into this a little bit later.
hmm
They were disbanded 2 years later, so they were only stood up as a special operations unit, if you will, for 2 years, and then the powers that be decided they didn't like the idea of Marine Corps having a special operations component.
hmm
And the main reason behind that, and it up until recently, 2005, 2006, um, they still held the same adage is that the Marine Corps is an elite unit all by itself. Should not have an elite unit within an elite unit. So um, that right there is why you see why most Marines are brainwashed, right?
Okay.
Because they're
Right.
told in boot camp, that they're above everybody else, that they're an elite service all by themselves. And for the most part, they really are. They've earned that reputation and that title over many battles over the course of the history of our country. But um, let's get back to the Marine Raiders real quick.
hmm
So imagine that you're 19, 20 years old. You're thousands of miles away from home. You're on a tropical island and very sparsely inhabited, I guess you could say. Um, but think about this: you're away from your family. In most cases, for the first time ever, your your clothes are completely soaked through. Right? It's so much so from sweat that it's creating chafing all over your body. Um, your feet are torn up because you're constantly slushing through water and muddy trenches and whatnot. Your feet are so bad that you're scared to take your socks off because your skin will just peel right off with them. Um, Not only that, but you're wearing all this gear, right? You've got this steel pot on your head. Now, keep in mind that the temperature there, it's close to the equator. So
hmm
temperature ranges usually from low to mid 80s, which doesn't seem that bad, but I'm sure the closer you get to the equator, the hotter it
hmm
gets. And the humidity level was in the I don't know, mid to high 80s and steadily climbing throughout the day. So not only do you have that to worry about, your balls are all chafed and shit. I don't know if you ever had swamp ass.
I've never had swamp ass.
Oh, it's miserable, man. Miserable. But, you don't really have any clean clothes to change into. You haven't had a shower in weeks. Uh, you're literally starving to death because it was so hard to get resupplied that these guys were living on basically two teaspoons of rice per
Yeah.
meal.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so you can imagine right there what that'll do to your body. But
hmm
since they're in this tropical environment, now we have all these other things we have to worry about. You've got dysentery. If you ever had dysentery,
No.
it's shitty,
Yeah, I bet.
literally.
I bet.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. So it's basically bloody diarrhea every half hour to an hour, right? And
right.
and with dysentery, basically it sloughs the lining of your colon,
hmm
so it can kill you.
Is that what? No. What is that caused by dysentery? Is it?
It's a bacteria.
Bacteria from malnourishment, or just
Well,
environmental, or
a lot of times it's from the water,
okay.
food that you eat. A lot of times you'll see people get like E. coli poisoning it's kind of like dysentery,
Okay.
You get the infected food that you eat gets into your body, the bacteria takes hold,
hmm
and then your body tries to fight it off.
hmm
So it's horrible.
Like
It,
bleeding you out, literally.
yeah, you're
Right. Shitting you out,
bloody,
and bleeding you out.
shitting you out, bloody diarrheas, a lot of, I know it's kind of gross, but a lot of mucus
Yeah.
involved with the stools. Um, a lot of the Marines and a lot of the soldiers even described it as being like a milky type of fecal matter.
Mm.
And that was because of the sloughing of the intestinal lining. So
Oh.
you had that to deal with. And usual course is antibiotics.
Hmm.
These guys didn't have that luxury. So a lot of them just had to deal with it. And some people were lucky enough to just resolve on its own. Some people
Hmm.
didn't make it. Um, in addition to that, almost every Marine in the Solomon Islands campaign either had, has, or will get malaria. The numbers are staggering. I think
Wow.
I'd have to look at it again. I think it was over 700,000
Wow.
um, service members suffered from malaria. I'm sorry, I got that backwards. It was 700,000 that suffered from dysentery and over 500,000 suffered from malaria.
Okay.
And then there are diseases like dengue fever.
Hmm.
So dengue fever, it's a mosquito-borne disease, and it's usually only found in the tropical areas. And the nickname is breakbone fever.
Hmm.
It's an awful, awful disease. And again, it's a bacterial. Well, it's not necessarily a bacterial infection, but it's treated with an antibiotic,
Hmm.
doxycycline typically. But they call it breakbone fever because you get these bad episodes of fevers, the sweats, and your bones and your muscles feel like they're breaking and ripping apart on you. It's a
But they're
horrible.
not.
They're
They're
not.
just it's giving off the feeling.
Right.
Wow.
So you're basically incapacitated,
Right.
um, which is the big thing that these guys had to contend with.
Hmm.
All of this, in addition to the Japanese that are trying to kill you.
Right. Yeah. You gotta fight a war too.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
and there's you know, they say that World War II is the last great generation.
You were just talking about all that thing, and I was thinking how many people today, right
None.
now, could just deal with,
Well,
you know, the dysentery.
right. I
You know,
wouldn't say none. Um,
well, percentage wise, we could probably just break this down and keep on going. But
right.
yeah,
It's
it
go ahead.
it's a different generation.
For
Yeah.
sure, man. For sure. And I spent for those that don't know, I spent over 30 years in the military
Hmm.
myself. A lot of that with the Marine Corps as a combat corpsman. And there have been times where we've been places and we've had sick Marines and I've been sick and
Hmm.
you don't have a choice, man. Mission comes first.
Yeah.
So you just suck it up and drive on.
Right.
There are people out there in today's society that could handle it.
Hmm.
For sure, man. And I would
Oh yeah,
say
definitely.
95% of your infantry Marines
Hmm.
and probably your infantry soldiers would as well.
Hmm.
Um, it's just part of the suck factor, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Uh, so, yeah, dealing with all that, and then knowing that, you know, at any moment you could be engaged by enemy. Now, I want to get back to the dysentery part
Hmm.
because these are some of the things that most people don't even think about, right?
Hmm.
If you've back then, they had to dig what are called cat holes. It's a 3x3 hole that you dig in the ground and you shit in and then you cover it up.
Hmm.
And there's a multitude of reasons as to why you do that, but one of the biggest reasons from a tactical side of the house, you don't want the enemy walking, seeing a big pile of human shit. Just give away your position.
Right.
But think about this: you're sitting there shitting every 30 minutes, right? Now you're worried about dropping trowel, and oh my god, am I going to die? Am I going to take a bullet while I'm shitting my
Hmm.
brains out? You know, and there weren't the technology didn't exist like it does today. You couldn't just, hop on your phone or Google or whatever and look up why am I shitting my brains out,
Hmm.
or you couldn't write home to love or you could write home to loved ones, but it was just that writing home. I know it's a
Right.
weird concept, right? And
Carrier pigeons, right?
yeah,
And they use
yeah,
carrier pigeons on the islands.
yeah. So I I'm a combat veteran and I try to put myself in their shoes.
Hmm.
And man, they had it way harder.
Hmm.
There's no doubt, man. War's war.
Hmm.
War sucks. People die in war. But the conditions that we have today, even if we've been out, out of the wire and downrange for weeks at a time, still better than what those guys had.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and so, there's kind of a joke in the Marine Corps with corpsmen. The Marines are always saying, well, all Doc's going to do is tell me to change my socks and hydrate, right?
Hmm.
Well, there's a damn good reason for changing socks. When I tell you these guys' feet, their skin sloughed off, I mean, you could just pull it right off,
Mm,
and it's disgusting.
mhm,
And the only way to really treat that is to remove them from that environment,
mhm,
right? So the feet have to dry out. Um, there's no removing anybody from that environment, not in those days, you know.
mhm.
Uh,
Kinda like a rot almost, right? Like a
it's exactly what it
right.
is. So it's, you know, when you have your foot or any part of your body in a dark, moist environment 24/7, skin's you've been in the bathtub for a long
Mhm,
time, right?
mhm.
Your skin gets kind of mottled.
Yeah,
Well, imagine that times 1,000,
right.
you know, and it's painful.
Yeah, I
It,
would imagine
it's real
pulling
painful.
your freaking skin off.
So
Anytime you can do that, it's probably there's
yeah,
gonna be some discomfort there,
it's gross too,
right?
man. I've seen it. I've dealt with it. I've treated it. We call it trench foot,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah,
And
and that was a big thing during World War II period or World War One, right?
World War
Because that was
One,
an originality of or the beginnings of trench warfare
right?
started there. And I know that there was a lot of sickness, there was
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of that going on.
Oh, yeah, it's
Mhm.
disease infested,
Yeah.
disease ridden, man. So if the enemy didn't get you, the diseases probably would.
Mhm.
Um, we lost. I know this isn't about World War One. We can cover that another time, but
Mhm.
uh, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it's pretty staggering the number of casualties that were inflicted from non-battle related issues.
Mhm.
Um, it's a lot of things to think about, you know, when you go into these environments that you never see in your war movies. You know, you never see on
Yeah,
YouTube.
to capture that kind of reality. Well, it's you know, I just watched a movie, and I don't want to get off topic, but I watched one on that All Is Quiet on the Waterfront. I don't know,
Oh
Western
yeah,
Front,
Western
and
Front. Yep.
that's a little too real. Sometimes it gets so real, it's like, wow, but it puts you in that position, that perspective of this is
Wow,
some real stuff.
this
Yeah,
sucks. Yeah.
and they're still kind of leaving out a lot of that. There's the cold, which
Hmm.
that's another thing. The cold of
All the
yeah,
frostbite. And
right.
yeah, it was horrible.
Hmm.
And you had issues when you got standing water like that,
Hmm.
cholera you have to worry about,
Hmm.
typhoid. Another big disease that was prevalent in um, in the Solomon Island campaigns was scrub typhus,
Hmm.
and it's a rickettsial-borne disease. It comes from the bite of mites from
Hmm.
field mice in the scrub and whatnot, where it got its name scrub typhus.
Hmm.
And today it's easily treatable. Back then, it wasn't as well known, and people just didn't get treatment for it. So
Hmm.
people died from it. People were definitely incapacitated. Um, and we could go into scrub typhus more in detail, but I'd rather not. We could save that for
Yeah, let's
another
talk about
show.
the Marine Raiders a little bit more. So I was
Yeah,
kind of it's interesting you were bringing up it was only 2 years, right? So it
only
was
2 years.
from 42 to 44,
Yep.
right? And then that was basically what it was is kind of a branch off, right, of the Marines, but a more specialized
Yes.
uh how I kind of refer to it or would refer to them as like a knockout artist because they were all offense, right? So they'd go
Right.
in, they had 3 times the weapons that the
Oh yeah.
Marines
The
had,
the
which made
weapons
the
were
Marines kind of angry, right? So that's probably another reason there's some conflict of like, hey,
right.
you're stepping on our toes here. But um, they were just really aggressive,
They were badass.
offensive. There is no put your hands up and defend. We're going in, we're killing, we're
Yeah.
hitting fast. What was it? It was get in, last first in, last out, but
Yep.
get in fast, get in quick, and basically kill. I mean,
Yeah.
that was the whole purpose. It was
They're,
a
the Marine Raiders were designed not to take prisoners.
right.
They were going there, and they were commandos
Hmm.
basically, and they were pretty much molded off of the British commandos.
Hmm.
So yeah, there was a lot of animosity from regular Marines and Marine Raiders, right?
Hmm.
Especially at the senior leadership levels.
Yeah.
Um, and what it came down to is jealousy.
Well, yeah, I mean that would come about no matter what, right? Because
Right.
you're like, well, aren't I good enough?
Well, and in some cases, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know,
Well, I mean,
and
they took over? Was it four? They did 4 areas that cleaned them out, right?
you talk
Pretty
about in
swiftly.
Solomon Islands.
Well, I think we had it was New Georgia,
Hmm.
uh, the Guadalcanal. Yeah, they
Guadalcanal,
did that. What was the big one?
Bougainville,
They hit the
Tulagi was
Tulagi.
another
Yeah.
one, but the big one that they're most famous for, and we're going to get into this in just a
Okay.
second, was the Guadalcanal
Okay.
campaign, specifically the Long Patrol,
Hmm.
and we'll talk about that here shortly. So there were basically they stood up these two battalions. Actually, I think it was four battalions they stood up, but the big ones were the First Raider Battalion, Second Raider Battalion,
Hmm.
and Second Raider Battalion was led by a gentleman named Lieutenant Colonel Carlson,
Hmm.
and
Is it
Lieutenant,
Evan F. Carlson? Right.
yes.
He started it up.
Well, he didn't start it, but he led Second Marine
Okay.
Battalion,
Oh,
Second
he
Marine
led.
Raider
Okay.
Battalion.
All
Yeah,
right.
he was the CO of that. Interesting enough, um, Franklin Delano Roosevelt
Was in
son,
office. Yeah, at that time.
his son was a Marine Raider.
Jimmy Roosevelt. That's
Yes.
right.
And you can't tell me for a second that that didn't have a lot of pull. You know,
Oh,
hey,
sure.
hey, Dad,
Little nepotism there. Maybe
we're
kind of going.
yeah, we're trying to start this thing up, and we're running into some problems.
Yeah.
So President Roosevelt was the one that decreed, yes, you will stand up this new
For
unit.
sure. Wasn't Carlson's son also?
Yes,
Wasn't he involved? But he didn't want him involved in it
yeah,
to a
yeah,
degree, and then well, we'll get to moving forward. But there was kind of some conflict there too, right?
for
Where
sure.
yeah,
And you can, I mean, you're a father, so you can
mhm,
totally understand that, man.
yeah,
You know the odds of you coming home are very slim.
hmm
The last thing that I will want as a parent is my son right there with me
hmm
and potentially losing him as well.
hmm
So I get it,
yeah,
but eventually they did uh, come together in the same unit and fight together. But so let's get back to Guadalcanal. So
hmm
Guadalcanal is a small, well, it's not that small of an island, but it's an island uh, in the middle of nowhere in the
hmm
Pacific Ocean. And so what happened is Lieutenant Colonel Carlson took his Marines. They floated from Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, which big shout out
hmm
because spent 2 tours in Hawaii, First Battalion, Third Marines. So that's what made the story even cooler.
right,
You know,
yeah,
man, I was at the same place that these guys were.
hmm
It may have been decades in the future,
sure.
uh, but the history, man,
Mhm.
the nostalgia, if you will,
That was like your Hollywood Walk of Fame, so to speak, right?
kind of, yeah,
Yeah, you're like
yeah.
going around seeing all the stars, but you just knew where everybody. Yeah, I get the feeling. It's
Yeah,
weird, right?
it is.
Yeah.
It gives you a strange sense of reverie,
hmm
if you will, um, knowing that these great warriors that allowed me to live the life that I live now
hmm
were here.
Right.
This
Yeah.
is where they trained. This
Yeah.
is where they stepped off from. So that's exactly what they did. They got on these big amphib boats and they floated because commercial airlines didn't exist like they do today.
Right. Yeah.
So they floated
hmm
all the way from Hawaii to Guadalcanal. They landed, and as soon as they landed, basically what had happened is that they were tasked by General Vandergrift, who was the commanding general for First Marine Division at the time.
Okay.
He was in charge of all the Marines on Guadalcanal. So on Guadalcanal, they had what's called Henderson Field, and it was the airstrip essentially that they were landing. They built and they landed their bombers and their fighters so that they could attack Iwo Jima
hmm
and the other islands in the atoll there. So there was a regiment of Japanese fighters. There were a couple regiments, but one in particular that was harassing Henderson Field. And so I believe, and my memory is not what it used to be, but I think it was the 238, 238th Infantry Regiment of
hmm
the Japanese. They were harassing the Marines at Henderson Field. So this other uh, infantry regiment of the Japanese, I believe it was 230th, the 230th Regiment, was supposed to link up. And for whatever reason, they didn't. They
hmm
circumvented, circled around the entire island, and then they linked up with a different regiment of Japanese. So General Vandergrift basically said, all right, here's what I need you to do. I need you to get out there and I need you to harass these Japanese soldiers.
hmm
And harass meaning I want you to kill them
Yeah.
and stop them from harassing the field so we can continue to get it built, continue to land our bombers and our fighters. So, being the good Marine that the colonel was, he said, aye, sir. And that's what they did. They took off west. Um, their mission was to basically come into these Japanese soldiers from the rear,
hmm
and they never saw them coming. And why they were so successful is because they would do a lot of hit and run raids, right?
hmm
Come in, hit the enemy when they're not expecting it, fade off into the jungle.
hmm
They were very, very successful. I believe the long patrol, and they call it the long patrol because it was a long distance that they traveled, but it was just shy of a month.
hmm
So for a whole month, that's all these raiders did was harass and kill the enemy essentially. And what's kind of important about that is the Marine Corps infantry. What I guess the best way to say is their mission statement, if you will, is to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. And
Hmm.
there's more to go with that. And that's exactly what these specialized Marines did. They located the enemy, they closed with them, they destroyed them, and then they faded back. So I think in a 3 week campaign, the Japanese lost over 400, I believe it was over 100, 450 soldiers in 3 weeks. And tactically speaking, it
Hmm.
was an incredibly successful campaign.
Hmm. Now, how many casualties were on the other side?
So the Marines did encounter, I believe it was 18, I think it was 14 killed in action
Mhm.
and 18 wounded in action.
So
So it doesn't
just
seem like a much, but they were a smaller unit to begin with.
smaller unit, but they were doing. I mean, considering that even makes it more impressive,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Because
for sure.
smaller amount of guys. You've got two football teams playing each other, and you only got three on one side, and
Yeah,
you got to find a way to win that game, and
right.
the end at scoreboard, and that's all that matters. But
And that's
think
exactly what
about
they
that.
did.
Would you say 450?
Ish.
Well,
Yeah, I could be mistaken, but I believe it was
it's a
400 or
scary group
so.
of guys right there,
Yeah.
right?
These Marines are badass motherfuckers, man. They took they took the Marines that were a lot of times troublemakers.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of times they took the Marines that had problems with authority,
Hmm.
and they took the type A of the type A's,
Hmm.
and they took these fools and they turned them into a deadly, deadly fighting force.
Hmm.
Um, eventually, now this went down in 1942, right? Um, in 1942, after or during, they saw how successful the campaign was, so they started a Raider training camp, and I
Hmm.
believe I don't remember exactly. I think it was Camp Pendleton.
Hmm.
Don't quote me on that, but it was an 8 week course, and they basically taught them
Was it 8 weeks, or I thought I That was it 3 months? I thought I'd seen it was actually longer, more extensive, and
initially.
initially, okay.
So the reason they started this school up is because they had all these specialized Marines and they
Mhm,
shipped them off, had no replacements for them.
mhm,
So just like every typical government problem that shows up, what do? We knee jerk, we react instead of
mhm,
you know
right.
instead of being proactive. So oh shit,
So they're pulling from the Marines, but while they're pulling from the Marines, it's a whole other monster, right? So you're taking while they're Marines, some of those Marines probably didn't sign up. I would imagine it's gonna be you're gonna kill.
no,
I
it
mean,
was all
you
volunteer.
okay, so they
Right,
volunteered, and I would imagine that's part of the prerequisite is like, here, there won't be any cooks in this. There's going to be we're
right,
going in, we're going to kill. You're going to get a sock full of rice, and you're going to get
basically,
yeah, and you're
yeah,
going to get some water, but you're going to kill, and that's it. That's your job. So
yeah,
you got to be willing to kill.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Um, and I'm pretty sure they didn't do a whole heck of
Hmm.
a lot of psychological testing back then. I'm sure there was some.
But it's probably for the better, right? Because they would have found all sorts of issues they didn't
Well,
want to deal with.
yeah, it's like today, man. When you go to special forces or you try to go to special forces, you have to go through a psych eval,
Hmm.
and they're looking to make sure that we want the people that can do the job, but we don't want the psychopaths.
Hmm.
We don't want the serial killers. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Um, so yeah, it's just it's kind of bizarre, and war will do that, man. Desperate
Hmm.
times call for desperate measures. So they obviously had to do something, and they did.
Right, and it's just it's quickly put together too, right? I mean,
Oh, very
it's a
quickly.
they're deciding. There's probably a lot of conflict inside. Where
Mm.
let's do this. I don't want to do this, and I'm sure you get all that.
Right. So you have to realize that the planning for this started way before 1942,
Hmm.
right? And it would have had to have.
Yeah, what
Um,
year? I wonder what year that would have been.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I would
We're pretty deep into the war at
40
42.
41 for
Hmm.
sure. Well, yeah, it depends. It really depends. Knowing how things were back then, it was
Hmm.
probably just thrown together,
Hmm.
and the direction was probably, and I'm assuming here,
Hmm.
it's probably make it happen and do not fail.
Right.
So, so they did, and the Marines have been dealing with less since the inception of the Marine
Hmm.
Corps in
Okay.
1775. So, um, yeah, it was very interesting.
So that's the first. They go to the Guadalcanal, and that's the first island.
Well, no. There was a whole series. There was a lot of island hopping, right?
Okay.
So you had Macon
Macon,
Island.
right.
Of course, you had the different engagements and
Mhm.
skirmishes on Guadalcanal itself. You had Tulagi.
Mhm.
Um, there's a couple other ones that I'm just brain farting off the top of my head. But yeah,
Mhm.
it was an island campaign, and eventually, had they kept those Marines, the Marine Raiders, I'm sure they would have been on Iwo Jima for sure. So the powers that be decided in 1944 that they need to go away.
Mhm.
So they did. When they disbanded, they kind of all just merged in the Fourth Marine Regiment,
Mhm.
which again is cool because I was part of Fourth Marine Regiment as well.
Mhm.
Um, so again, it's that history. It's that, and to me, it means more because it's not an actor. You know, you get to go to Hollywood and you run into your favorite actor or whatever, but we have our way of life
Mhm.
right now because of these guys
Sure.
and because of everything that they did. And on top of it, um, special forces in America wasn't really a thing until the 60s.
Mhm.
Um, so maybe there was some staging
Mhm.
in the late 50s, especially for the Green Berets. But the Green Berets came first.
Mhm.
And then in 1961, President Kennedy said that I want the Navy to have some kind of special forces.
Mhm.
And that was the birth of the SEALs.
Okay.
Um,
So that came after the Raiders. The Raiders kind of opening some
they
doorways there. Well,
they
hey, that worked so well. Let's
absolutely they
right.
opened the doorways for all the special forces in America.
Okay.
Um, prior to that, in the Navy during World War II, we had what was called UDTs,
Mhm.
underwater demolition teams,
Mhm.
and so those were the precursor to the SEALs. Um, but we're not even going to get into them right now.
Right.
We could go on forever, but we won't. So anyway, in 1944, they were disbanded and then absorbed into the Fourth Marine Regiment,
Mhm.
which is cool. Um, historically, now probably wasn't cool then. I would have been pissed.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
you get you get all this specialized training. You know, you were the dogs of war. You were unleashed, and now you're being put back in your cage.
Mhm.
So I can't imagine. I can't imagine how those Marines must have felt. I'm sure there was a lot of bitterness,
Mhm.
a lot of anger, animosity, and yeah, just trying to put myself in their shoes. That's bizarre as hell to
Mhm.
me, man. Um, so interestingly enough, in 2006, let me back up. Prior to that, again, the Marine Corps' vision of the Marine Corps was we don't need special forces because we're elite already.
Mhm.
Now, we did have what was called Marine Recon. Um, and basically, their job was to go out and be eyes and ears for infantry battalions,
Mhm.
sneaky peeky stuff, all kinds of sometimes direct action, but not so much. Their mission was basically if you were seen, you failed your mission.
Mhm.
Um, so that evolved
So it's
into
like ninjas, right?
kind of, yeah,
Like the
ninjas
very
of the
first
jungle.
ninjas.
Yeah, but way deadlier and
Right.
much more firepower.
Yeah, right. They didn't have the throwing stars.
No,
I
no,
don't know
no
if you can
throwing
call that more
stars.
firepower.
Um, so yeah, and then it developed into what's called force recon,
Mhm.
and so those were kind of like the special operations capable units, and they would
Right.
go on the different MU floats, Marine Expeditionary Unit, float around in the middle of the ocean, and if something came up, then those guys would get sent in.
Mhm.
Now it's evolved into Marine Corps Special Operations Command, MARSOC.
Mhm.
And that came about in 2005 or
Mhm.
2006. I don't remember exact year, right around in there. Um, so now this Marine unit is recognized by Joint Special Operations Command. So they are finally their own special operations unit. And the Marine
Okay.
Corps finally got off their ass and said,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So
We had a tough time dealing with it, but all
you got to
right.
give in.
Yeah, it was
Well,
effective. We'll
you,
give you that.
you have to understand warfare had changed drastically,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the need were for surgical strikes
Mhm.
um, and special operations capable units. So
Mhm.
if you want to be relevant,
Yeah.
I guess you better get up to speed.
Yeah, so that's MARSOC, and it's the same basis as the Marine Raiders? It's basically just rebranded, renamed.
Yes and no.
Okay.
So your MARSOC guys,
Mm-hmm.
your Marine Special Operations, they're equivalent
Mm-hmm.
to your Green Berets. They're equivalent to your SEALs. They are a legit tier 2
Mm-hmm.
level of special operations. So
Okay.
they get all the high speed, low drag schools, equipment,
Mm-hmm.
training, and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
These guys are pretty amazing, and most
Right.
people have no idea that these guys even exist.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah. I can see that. A lot of people don't have any idea what a lot exists. In terms
right.
of that, they don't really. They just think it gets done.
Hmm.
We don't know how we do it, but we do it. That's impressive because it's now. My question would be, what does their training consist of? What are the major? Is it just hand to hand? Is it more weaponry because they
It's
have more advanced weaponry? Uh, Demolition,
it's
I
all the
suppose,
above,
all of it.
all
Okay,
the above.
okay.
So these guys are jump qualified. They jump out of airplanes. A lot of
Mhm.
them are Halo qualified, which is high altitude, low opening.
Right.
So they'll jump out of a plane at pretty high altitudes
Mhm,
and they'll float in. They'll free fall in
mhm,
to their target. And these guys, you can go miles and miles and miles on a free fall
mhm,
um, just to get to their target. And then a lot of times they'll patrol into to where they need to be.
mhm.
Um, yeah. So hand in hand, of course, the Marine Corps has, oh God, I called it Semper Fu. The Marine Corps Combatives Program.
Okay.
So, yeah, they get out there and every Marine has to go through the Marine Corps Combatives Program.
Mhm.
But these guys, of course, take it a step further in everything that they do.
They're getting like their doctorate, right? They're like,
Well, they're more specialized,
mhm,
so they require more specialized training.
right.
An infantry battalion, usually about, I think, peacetime TO, which is table of organization, is about 900 Marines
Mhm,
for peacetime
right.
battalion. So you've got a whole battalion of these fucking hard chargers by your side. You know,
Yeah, right.
the Marine Corps Special Operations teams, they call them MSOTs, Marine Corps Special
Mhm,
Operation Teams, operate in much smaller capacities.
mhm,
So, seven, 7 to 10 men, sometimes depending on the setup, the mission
mhm,
profile. So yeah, they're required to have the more specialized training because they're sent out and hey, you're on your own.
mhm.
Hope nothing bad happens.
Yeah,
We might come get you, we might not. I
right,
don't know. Um,
right. Wow.
and a lot of these guys get sent on missions of national security that we'll never ever hear about
Right. I
in the
would bet.
countries that most people probably couldn't find on a map.
Mhm,
So there's a lot to be said for it. Now, when I went through, I don't know what the uh, MARSOC training requirements are
mhm,
anymore. I've been out of that game
mhm,
for many 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 years. But when I went and I did battalion recon, I can tell you what my screening test
mhm,
to even get looked at to be accepted. Um, I had to do a Marine Corps PFT,
mhm,
which is a physical fitness test. And that consists of a 3 mile run, as many pull ups you can do in 2 minutes, and many sit ups you can do in 2 minutes.
mhm,
Then you get maybe, I don't know, well, I'm trying to remember what we did. Okay, so after the PFT, we went to the pool,
mhm.
did a 500-meter swim in full camis. Um, I forget the time. Man, we're talking 25 years ago.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
so,
And is that something that you have to keep being retested for? Like, I mean,
you're constantly evaluated,
right.
constantly. Now,
Yeah.
you may not have to go through and do an in test every year or anything like that, but
Mhm.
if you don't hold your weight, you're not going to last.
Sure. Yeah.
It's
You're not going to be allowed to sit around and put on weight and
right, right,
go up 10 waist sizes and
right. Because you're a
yeah.
liability at that
Yeah,
point.
it's a constant yeah.
And once you're in those units, you are treated like an adult.
Mhm.
So your physical fitness is your responsibility.
Mhm.
With a few exceptions of company runs or battalion runs or whatever the case may be. But for the most part, you're expected to maintain your own physical fitness. So after the PFT, we did the pool, 500-meter swim. I forget the time requirements. Immediately after that swim, you had to tread water for a half hour.
Mhm.
Um, After that, you had to swim 25 meters, I think it was, with a 5-pound brick
Mhm.
over your
Over
head
your head.
out of the water. I'd be surprised how many people can't do that.
Well, that's yeah. You're holding it there, so it's a constant.
Yeah.
That constant not movement, but
It's that weight. Well, your
yeah,
movement's
it's a
restricted
time under
because
tension of that whole thing, and then you're trying to do something else too. It's like,
right,
but then again, that takes us right back to eating a bag of rice a day and having to
right.
go fight a war. It's
Um,
kind of goes hand in hand.
yeah, and everything they do, there's a reason behind it. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So after that, we got out. We did a. I had to do a. I don't remember. I think it was 6 miles. I
Hmm.
think it was a 6 mile ruck run with a 45-pound pack.
Hmm.
Um, and that was after you did all that. Now, granted, you had like some exercises you had a minimum of 2 minutes
Hmm.
or maximum. I'm sorry, maximum of 2 minutes in between each evolution. So there wasn't like, all right, I got that swim done. Let me kick back and relax for a little
Hmm.
bit. No, it was on to the next evolution. Essentially, enough time to change your clothes and move on to the next one.
Hmm.
Um,
Just nonstop,
it
just
was
moving through it.
nonstop, and
Yeah.
it's an ass kicker, man. So when I went through and I did the initial screening, we had a lot of guys that came to try out that
Hmm.
went to Buds, basic underwater demolition SEAL school, and failed.
Hmm.
And so we called them Buds Duds.
Hmm.
So we had a bunch of Buds Duds show up, and what surprised me is the numbers of those guys. Well, none of them made it.
Hmm.
None of them. Um,
And they're probably still a bunch of studs.
oh,
I
they
mean,
were.
technically
They were
speaking, they're
studs.
just so there's no shame in that.
No,
You're just not at that level.
right.
And that happens.
And it's and when I tried out,
Hmm.
I'd already been in the fleet with the Marines, so I'd well accustomed to the suck.
Hmm.
You just put your mind to, hey, just get through this,
Hmm.
get to the next one,
Hmm.
and you don't worry about all the other shit.
Hmm.
Now, I will tell a funny story about
Hmm.
this. So I've got a really good friend of mine. When I took the screening, he was the screener for Special Amphibious Reconnaissance Corpsman on the West Coast.
Hmm.
So he flew out to Great Lakes, and I picked him up at the airport, and we went out. We got fucked up. I mean, stupid drunk, right?
Hmm.
So an hour after we get home, he's waking me up. He's like, "You ready?" I'm like, "For what?" Because it's time. I'm like, "Shit." I was hungover like a motherfucker, man.
You're like, that's a terrible decision right there.
And he's like,
Right?
and I looked down and I said, "This is fucked up."
Mm.
I'm not gonna mention his name.
Yeah.
He says, "Yeah, I know. I know you can do this shit sober.
Hmm.
I want to see how you react when you're not at optimum."
Hmm.
Hey, thanks, buddy.
Yeah.
So there were no special, he wouldn't cut me any special breaks at all because I knew him.
He's expecting a little bit of
Oh,
decline now.
he,
Right. He's going, it's gonna be a little decline in performance, but we'll see
well,
where we're at.
yeah,
The baseline of all
totally,
this.
totally. But here's the thing, man, is I threw up on the run. I threw up in the pool.
Right.
I threw up on the ruck run.
Yeah, yeah.
I probably had 2 IVs after the whole
Yeah.
thing was done. Right.
Right.
But still made all the
Hmm.
times, you know,
Just getting through it.
just
It is
fucking
what it is. Yeah. Miserable.
truth be told, it's probably better I was hungover like that
Hmm.
because I was more worried about how shitty I felt being hungover
Hmm.
as instead of worried about how well am I going to do on this
Hmm.
test.
Yeah.
Um, so that was kind of beneficial. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think there was one other person. We had 20, 25 guys try out. One other person made it with me
Hmm.
to the last evolution. We had guys quitting, didn't even make it through the whole thing.
Hmm.
They would quit at the either at the treading water, which really surprised me because they came from buds. So
Hmm.
so it's 4 phases of buds, right? First phase or fourth phase is basically your conditioning
Right.
pre-phase, right? So I don't know how far these guys made it through.
Yeah.
If they got the pool week and they quit at that, they're pretty fucking
Mhm.
sorry. But it was tough. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Eventually, though, I ended up getting to special amphibious. Wait a minute, no, it was amphibious reconnaissance school, and I just tell people I quit.
Hmm.
That's all we need to go into.
Hmm.
We don't need to go any further on that. I have had my reasons. Everybody does, but
Hmm.
shit happened and I didn't make it.
Sure.
End of story.
Yeah. A lot of people probably don't make that though, right?
No.
I gotta go back a bit here because we were talking about the bag of rice thing gets me right.
Mhm. Sock.
You're fighting a war, you're shitting blood, and I would be curious to see what a soldier in that unit would look like pre going into that. Now, what was the
Oh
longest
yeah.
battle on something like that? Like when they went in, it was mostly island, the 4 islands, right? What was the longest one?
Um,
Can you recall?
I can't off the
I
top of my
thought I
head.
heard like 31 days or something. That was a pretty extensive battle that lasted that long. But if that's the case, before they went, when they first started this,
Mhm.
they first got this unit together. They started. I'm sure they all were pretty. They
Oh,
probably had carried
jacked.
some
Oh
muscle.
yeah,
So
man.
I'm just curious on
Yeah.
bags of rice and stuff. And then fighting and shitting and
These
what
guys
what
are
did it look like
emaciated,
afterwards? Like,
emaciated.
yeah, right.
Shells of themselves, basically.
Yeah,
You
which would just take a lot out of you too, right? At the end of
you-
the day, you had to be like sleeping for days and
if you get to sleep,
yeah.
if you're
Well, I'm
not.
saying once it's all over with, they're saying, hey, we're
Oh
done,
yeah,
breaking up the unit. I wonder how long those guys went. I'll see you guys next year.
probably none of them.
None of them went
None
right
of them.
back.
Because
Okay.
back then it was, hey, we're disbanding the unit. Welcome to your new unit.
Okay. Right. Yeah. They
And
just merged them back in. Okay.
the important thing to realize
Hmm.
and to kind of keep in context is nowadays when we deploy, Army deployments are a year long,
Hmm.
right? So they'll go to the combat zone, they'll stay there for a year. Now, in between, halfway through, they'll get an R&R period.
Hmm.
Um, most of the Navy, most of the Marine Corps are 6 or 7 month deployments. World War II, you left and you didn't come home till the war was over.
Hmm.
Uh, in most cases, there are exceptions, but think about that, man.
Hmm.
You leave home, you're fighting, you have no idea,
Yeah.
number one, when you're coming home or even if you're coming home.
Yeah, things are so different then because and then you're away from home and women weren't really in the workforce. They
Right.
kind of had to go out in the workforce. You're sending home back pay a lot of the times.
Yep.
Um, and most of the time you weren't coming home live.
Right.
You were getting out of there via death or you were getting out of there via injury. But
Right.
yeah, it's crazy. It was a crazy war, and,
Oh,
and,
for
and it's like
sure,
that
man.
movie I referred to earlier. It really sends home that there's really no good side of it.
No, there's not,
There's
man.
so many areas and aspects of what was going on, but there's really no good side to that. And that brings to light, like you look at like the war that we're fighting right now via proxy with Russia,
Mhm.
and everyone's okay, sending money. You're kind of still involved in a way, and that could escalate at any
Oh, for
point.
sure, man.
And then we're right back in something that
Well,
isn't pretty. There's nothing pretty about it,
Kosovo might be kicking off again.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I read that today, as a matter
Hmm.
of fact. The Serbs and all that
Hmm.
shit's starting to kick off, and that's not good. If we're not careful, I'll get political for a minute.
Okay.
If we're not careful with the leaders that we have right now,
Hmm.
we could find ourselves back into another European conflict.
Yeah.
Global.
Do you think you mentioned the leaders that we have right now? Do you think that that's part of the appeal to certain
Oh, for
people,
sure,
certain
man.
bureaucrats, maybe that we got these guys because they're willing to do, war is an appealing thing for some people, and do you think that these, I know that with the last leader, we were pretty much warless, and I don't think that. I'm beginning to think
Well,
that really wasn't ideal for some people.
well, it's definitely not
Hmm.
ideal for the military industrial
Hmm.
complex,
Sure.
for sure. But no, I think you're giving Biden way too much credit.
Okay.
Way too much credit. As a matter of fact, I think it's quite the opposite. The rest of the world leaders know how weak he is.
Hmm.
And so they're going to
Yeah.
get away with a lot more.
That's the other side. That's the other element. That was my original thoughts when, you know, you knew Putin was going to do something like that. If it strike while the iron's hot, right? And
Oh,
now's the
yeah.
perfect time to do that. I expect, there would be some sort of something coming up between China and Korea or
Malaysia or not
Taiwan,
Taiwan. Yeah.
Taiwan, and then what you're saying with Kosovo, you know, if it smells
It,
like a turd and it looks like a turd, but then there's that other side of, well, this is kind of by design too, because they knew this might happen if he were in office,
Mhm.
and the powers that be were saying good because this is what we want anyway. I don't. There's multiple ways to look at that,
Sure.
but it comes back to the main point is if you go historically speaking and seeing what real wars, there's still are soldiers out there fighting wars today.
Mhm.
They're still dying today.
For sure.
Uh, it's not pretty.
No, it's not.
There's nothing, and then you just bring up the little things, the cold, the dysentery, the
Mhm.
disease, the freaking pulling your skin off the bottom of your shoes, and and brutal. You
Yeah,
know.
and let's not forget about the things that you do when you're in a combat zone
Hmm.
and you're not actually engaged in combat.
Hmm.
You've got watches to stand. There's
Hmm.
always things to do. You know, you're not sleeping.
Hmm.
You know, you may
You're
get
not
a
playing virtual reality. That's what my kid's doing right now.
no, definitely not. You don't need virtual. You're in reality.
Right,
You
you're
know,
in reality.
um,
Too real.
there's so you don't sleep well. You know,
Yeah.
uh, the food sucks. Of course, fortunately, we have
You mean
food.
rice? Rice is 2 bags for
Well,
what was it? Two was it like a sock full I read or
a sock full
and
initially.
maybe some bacon, some crumpled up bacon or something like
Yeah, but
that?
once they got into the combat,
Hmm.
they didn't have much. You know,
Yeah.
resupplying was very, very difficult in those days.
Well, how many people today, just average person, could go on a cup of rice and some crumbles of bacon without you hearing about it all day long about how much they haven't
None,
eaten? Not
none,
right.
none,
Yeah, let alone
none. Yeah,
go out and fight a war,
right.
fight and kill. Take the. I don't even know how it's possible, honestly. The to sustain, to keep the energy,
Mhm.
to keep the focus, and such little nourishment. But wow,
It's
yeah.
very tough, and ultimately, at the end of the day, it's cliche. I know you've heard it a
Hmm.
thousand times, but you're not fighting for your country,
Hmm.
man. You're really not at that point. You're
Yeah,
fighting for your brother to your left and to your right.
sure.
You know,
Yeah.
those are the people that keeps you going.
Hmm.
You know, um, and it's as cliche as it sounds. It's the honest to God truth.
Hmm.
Um, a country on a whole, what are they going to do for me? Nothing. What's my brother going to do if I get hit? I know he's going to take care of me,
Yeah.
or vice versa.
Yeah.
So that's what we're fighting for. And I promise you, going back to what you talked about, how these guys looked before.
Hmm.
Think about how they think about how they were afterwards mentally.
Hmm.
Nobody comes back the same. Nobody.
There's no way.
Uh, I am a
Yeah.
different person for sure.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. I think you die in some format, right? You don't come back. Well, let's look at your parents. Your parents aren't getting the boy back or girl
right.
that they send away. I
No,
don't think it's possible, right?
no, it's not.
Hmm.
Uh, and if you do come back the same,
Hmm.
you're probably fucked up before you left.
Hmm.
You're definitely some
Just
kind
no
of
one notices. Like, ah, he's always like
yeah, right. Yeah, he's
that.
always
He's always
fucking
burning
weirdo,
ants.
but yeah, killing cats, you know. But you know, even your special operators,
Hmm.
man, your SEALs, your Delta, your Green Berets, those guys, every single one of them, I guarantee you has PTSD of some sort. You know,
Yeah.
you see the things and you do the things that they've done. It's impossible to come
Hmm.
back normal.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't mean you can't cope. It doesn't mean you can't deal with it.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean you can't be a productive member of
Sure.
society.
It's
But
going to be more of a challenge. Like hell, I get pissed just sitting in a red light for too long. And I'm bitching. And I think it's the end of my life. I'm like, oh my god, I've
right,
been here
hurry up,
5 minutes.
hurry up, you fuckers.
Right? I feel
Um,
changed after that.
it's most people can function very well.
Hmm.
It's at night when it's quiet
Hmm.
and you start thinking, you start remembering, or you get flashbacks,
Hmm.
or even worse, at night when you're sleeping, you get nightmares. Um, you can't tell me it doesn't change somebody. There's no
Yeah,
way, no
for
way,
sure.
no way. But yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about
Yeah.
with regards to the Raiders. It's very fascinating history, um, especially especially when you think about they were only involved in the war for 2 years.
Hmm.
It's crazy to me, you know.
That is crazy. And then to dissolve the whole unit,
Right.
only to kind of go, hey man, we're kind of on to something good there. Let's bring that back.
Yep.
I got a question for anybody, like anybody watching or listening.
Mhm.
Is there movies? Any movies out there? I'm sure John Wayne made about 10 of them, right? But
About the
are there any
Raiders,
movies that on the Raiders that
um,
covered that at all? Or
I'm almost certain there is.
Mhm.
Uh, in fact, if I had my computer in front of me, we could look it up.
Sure, sure.
But you know, if we find out what I will do is I will research that and I will put that down in the
Hmm.
description
Yeah,
so people can go to that if they want to see it.
right.
Um,
Yeah, that'd be interesting to see. I know you're familiar with all this. So for me, I was pulling some stuff up on YouTube and trying to bring myself to light on what it's all about. And it is interesting.
mhm.
And on one hand, it seems like, oh, they're on an island. They're in the tropical weather. And then you're like, and then we're eating bags of rice. I got a sock full of rice. I'm like, ah,
Shit
I'd rather
myself.
be in frickin' Siberia, frickin' eating a
I
steak.
tell you what, man. In an island like that, tropics sounds great,
Mhm.
but it's
Not under those circumstances.
no.
No, no
You
way, no
know,
how. Yeah, no way, no how, dude.
unless you've been in an environment like that, similar to that, it's hard. It's really hard to grasp
Mhm.
what those guys actually went through, man. When I was doing the research on this, I would just my mind was flooded with constant memories of being on tropical islands and having that fucking crotch rot
Mhm.
and my feet fucked up, and we were just training,
Mhm.
you know, and you're sticky, and it's just you can't clean yourself,
Yeah.
you just stay miserable.
It's all, and you're bringing that up, and I'll even go ahead and add. I had a blister on my. I got some new shoes last week. I had a blister on my heel. I had a blister on my heel, and I'm like, God dang, am I gonna be able to freaking do the things? I mean, but you
Right.
put that into perspective of what you're saying, that these people had all these, their skin diseases and the lack of nourishment,
Mhm.
the fact that you got to worry about being killed, the fact that you just everything compiled on top of one another. And that's
It's
how I try to look at things a lot. Like, here I am bitching about my blister.
right.
I was thinking, where am I going to get a band-aid at for this damn thing?
So there's a reason why a lot of military people look at civilians the way they do.
Mhm.
That has a lot to do with it,
Yeah, sure.
And I'm not
For
knocking
sure.
you,
No, dude, for
but
sure.
I
It,
tell you,
I don't know how you couldn't. I don't know how you could go through what you go through. And you could, I would have to think, while you appreciate a common citizen for what they are and who they are,
mhm,
there's still some lack of respect, right? There's still some lack of
a
not
lot.
respect, but there's some lack of
Uh, I wouldn't say lack. There's a lot.
a lot.
It
Okay, there we go.
depends. It
Yeah.
really depends,
Hmm.
especially if you're in. Let's say you're in a bar and you hear some fucking yahoo run his mouth about how tough
It's
is
every bar right now.
right,
It's happening right now as you said that.
right.
He's smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a
Running their
day.
mouth about how tough their life is,
Right.
and man, I had to wake up at 8 o'clock this morning and go to work.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
Yeah.
Nobody's shooting at you.
Yeah. He looks at my girl
Yeah.
one more time. I'm
Right.
going over kicking his ass.
Um,
Yeah, and he can't even. He's lucky to get out of bed every
right,
day.
right. So before we would deploy, I don't know if it's still this way or not
Mm.
since I'm retired, but um, every infantry unit in the Marine Corps had to do what's called a Marine Corps Combat Evaluation
Mhm.
Test, or MCRES. And part of that, it's a huge exercise, right? Field exercises, the whole 9 yards. But the last evolution typically is a 26-mile forced march in 8 hours less in full gear.
Mhm.
Um, those suck.
Mhm.
There's just, yeah, it just sucks. There's
Right.
no kind words you can come up with for that evolution. So these battalion hikes that you have to do, the McCree, the last evolution, you work up to them, right? You
Mhm.
usually start out at like a 6 mile hike, and you do them every Friday. You do them on Fridays on purpose, so you have the weekend to recover.
Mhm.
Once you get to that last one, man, that 26 miler, it's an ass kicker. And as a corpsman, um, you're responsible for the health and safety of the Marines.
Mhm.
And there's always an accordion effect, right? You got to picture this in your mind, if you can. 900 motherfuckers all in a line
Mhm.
walking 26 miles. And it's not a casual stroll, it's a fast pace. 26 miles in 8 hours. That's a mother in
Mhm.
full gear.
Mhm.
That's moving. So inevitably, you always have Marines that fall out, whether it's due to heat exhaustion, heat stroke, whatever the case may be, injuries. So the corpsmen have to stop, evaluate, treat, and then you got to haul ass to catch back up.
Mhm.
So anyway, you're constantly running to catch up, and you're doing twice the amount of work
Mhm.
that the other Marines are doing. And Doc is never expected to fail.
Mhm.
So you've got, that weighing on you. You're tired. You're hurting like everybody else. And on breaks, Doc doesn't get to sit down.
Mhm.
Doc's got to go up and down the line,
Mhm.
check all his Marines' feet. And the reason I brought that up is because just on that one hike, I've had Marines where the entire sole of their foot has sloughed off.
It's just
Just
come off.
comes off. Yep. Marines lose toenails all the time. I'd almost always lose my right big toenail
Mhm.
every hike. It grows back, but it just sucks,
So you didn't have issues with it before, it just came off,
Yeah,
or
it's
it just came
because
off?
that
Wow.
constant trauma, those boots, walking that 26 miles with all that weight, and on top of it, the Marines have their gear that they carry. You carry everything that they do,
Mhm.
in addition to a 20 to 40 pound additional pack
Mhm.
of medical gear.
Yeah.
So,
So you saying this is worse than my blister that I had on my heel?
pretty much.
Okay. All
And,
right.
and that's why I'm saying, there's a lot of disdain when veterans look at civilians because of that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's it. Every I get, and I hear people a lot because I have a lot of pain from just sports related issues, and I live with them. I don't even think about them because it's just you get
Yeah.
up, you roll through it. It's just what it is. You've been dealing with it for so long, and then I hear people, I got a headache. You have a headache? I got a headache, and it's just like I
Right.
wake up like
Shut the
pretty much,
fuck up.
yeah. So I can only imagine what it would be like to be, you're dealing with their head issues that you might have through
Mhm.
PTSD, and then the things that you've seen,
Mhm.
which is PTSD, and then the things that have happened physically to you, jumping out of planes, parachuting, stuff like that,
Yeah.
bullet wounds, and then it's always, I got a buddy. He served in the military Marines, and he did the what do you call it, the
Paris
parachuting,
Island. Oh,
when they jump out,
yeah,
and
yeah.
they have to do all that. And he deals with issues all the time. He's had multiple shoulder surgeries, knee surgeries, back surgeries. He's had it all. And it's funny because out of everyone I know, I never hear him complain. He'll be at the gym 5, 6 days a week. I never hear a word from him, and I pick up on it. I don't even think he knows that I noticed that he's doing it, because the rest of my day is consumed with everyone going, God damn,
Right.
I
Right.
burned myself with the freaking
Curling iron.
curling iron earlier, and I get to listen to that, and it's funny because I always think, I go, man, this guy's just probably in pain all the time. I never hear it, not a damn word about it.
Yeah.
So, it's all relative in a way, but that those are the things that I pick up on, the
Mhm.
things that you're saying that I notice and think, yeah, that's we're back to the Marine Raiders, a special group that can go in there, can do what they do. It gives you an understanding of it. It's historically, um, I think to know where we're going, it's kind of a cliche to know where we're going. We need to know where we've been,
Absolutely.
but you need to appreciate the people
For
like the
sure,
Marine
man.
Raiders, the people that are doing it right now.
They're the
Yeah,
trailblazers.
the trailblazers that are doing the stuff, and it's so cliche to say it, but so I can sit here and bitch about my blister in my foot, but that's that's the reality of it, and I think it's good, and it's one of the things that we're going to try to do is you know have some laughs, have some fun, but
For
also
sure.
cover important topics like this that
Yeah.
I think everyone should know.
Absolutely.
And I think if you kind of get a better understanding like that, maybe you'll have a little bit more humility when you start to bitch about your curling
Maybe.
iron burn and
Maybe.
the
Hopefully.
rough day you had.
I don't know. I think I'll be honest. Most Americans don't appreciate what we have, and it's until you go overseas and you've seen some of the shit. I can see how it'd be hard to appreciate.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
know.
100%. And I think also, I think you can see that everywhere I think, one of the things that come to mind when I was watching the videos on it, and I know we want to wrap this up, but one of the things is that you see what those guys were going through, and I was watching some of the
Mhm.
island footage and how they looked afterwards and what they were eating
Mhm.
and what they were going through, and I thought, I'll bet you not one of those guys were talking about gender reassignment or a campfire. And hey,
Guarantee it.
yeah, so
Guarantee it.
there's that too, right? So it's one of those
Guarantee
things
it.
that I don't think, if you knew, if you have the knowledge, that I think there should be some sort of there should just be some
Appreciation.
sort of appreciation, but maybe shame, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Shame, and we got bottled water today. It's
Yeah.
Evian water, and that's one of the topics I want to cover later on in the podcast, is the evolution of bottled water. Right?
Yeah.
We went
Oh
from
yeah.
drinking out of streams and in pioneering land to freaking drinking from water bottles and worrying about the stuff. So
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
History's it's something that we need, I think, keep fresh and
You have to,
yeah.
man. You know, the old saying, if you don't understand history, you're doomed to repeat it, is so true.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, what's happening then?
we're reliving it.
Okay.
We're
All
reliving it. I
right.
will leave you all with this. There's a saying in the SEAL teams that everybody wants to be a frogman until it's time to do frogman shit. So everybody wants the glory, but nobody wants to put the work in. And I'll just I'll leave you with that,
Yeah.
and we'll wrap this topic
Well,
up.
it's something to think about for sure. So
Anyway, hey, thanks for tuning into our inaugural episode of the Nostalgically Hit podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you do, let us know. Contact us, and we plan on bringing some pretty interesting topics. And if you can relive some of that, if it brings you happy memories or maybe not so happy memories, or even if you learn something new, that's kind of our goal. But Ryan, thanks for coming on the show, my friend.
yeah.
And we'll catch you guys on the next episode.